Ready?
I am.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here, and I am very excited to have as my guest today, Chelsea Brown. Chelsea, welcome.
I'm so excited to be here.
Chelsea is an LPC Supervisor in Oklahoma and owns Restoration Behavioral Health in Muskogee, Oklahoma. She's a nationally certified trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapist, having trained at the University of Oklahoma's Center for Child Abuse and Neglect. She's also a provider of CPT, cognitive processing therapy, and evidence-based treatment approach to PTSD in adults. Chelsea focuses on trauma work for her community and specializes in treating first responders, but she also serves the kids that come through her advocacy center who've been victims of abuse and neglect. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you're welcome. So before we go in here, Chelsea, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
So I am originally kind of from all over. We're right smack dab in the middle of the Bible Belt in Oklahoma. My dad was actually a Southern Baptist pastor. So I was born in New Mexico, hopped around towns in New Mexico, Oklahoma, eventually settled here in Muskogee, and have kind of been here ever since. So I'm for better or worse, kind of an Okie from Muskogee.
Okay. All right, so let's jump in here. How did all this start for you?
That's a great question. So originally, I don't know how familiar your listeners are with kind of like the Enneagram, but I'm an 8, and if most people who study like counselors will tell you that most of them are like 2s and 9s. 2s are nurturers, 9s are peacemakers, but I was an 8. And so originally I wanted to be an attorney. That's what I thought I would do.
What's an 8? Is that like hard driving?
Yeah, they're kind of like the pit bull. Like a healthy 8 is a great leader. An unhealthy 8 is just kind of a pit bull. So whenever I went in,
what are you?
I would like to say that now I'm leaning in a much healthier direction than I probably was when I went to college. So, we've come a long way, but it was really crazy. I went into my undergrad and I took an abnormal psych class and was just mind blown. I mean, just fascinated. I was hooked. I just, the idea of like curiosity with people. And so, I took another class and another class and another class, and I was all in. But what was really funny is the first class in my graduate program, which for everybody is usually like your ethics course, because they, want to make sure that you are a well-meaning, decent human before they send you into everything else. The first class, my undergrad, I'm sitting in ethics, and they do the kind of perfunctory, like, tell us who you are and why you want to go in this field. And I was last. So 25 other people are going around, and they're all like, oh, we just want to help people. Like, we just love people and we want to help people. And I was like, oh, I'm in the wrong field. Like, I've messed up. And so they get to me and I'm like, I just find this whole thing fascinating. Like, just understanding like the nuts and bolts of people in general. Like, I'm just curious. And I really thought it was a liability, like all the way through grad school. I just felt like the odd duck the whole time. Huh. And then during my internship, I had my first trauma client. And it was a sexual assault victim. And I remember hearing just the desperation in her voice. Like, she just wanted help. She just needed relief. And by the time I was done staffing the case with my supervisor in group supervision, everybody's crying. I mean, they're just losing it. Hearing the story, the whole thing. And I realized, like, I can hang. Like, I can do this. I can hang in there with these stories. I've got so much problem solving skill and so much natural, like, I want to get to the root of this. I want to understand, and I want to try to help. Mm-hmm. That from there, it was just a rocket ship. I read every trauma book I could get my hands on. The Body Keeps the Score, as an undergrad, I was just like, oh, this makes so much sense. And then from there, I just turned it up to 11 and just kept going with it.
So what about it made sense to you?
The neurobiology, for starters. I was like, oh, I mean, she couldn't stop shaking because of, vagus nerves exist. Like, and that's a whole thing. Like, her digestion was messed up. But also at the same time, understanding the neurobiology in terms of like watching somebody who's actually going through it, And so it's bringing to life all of these barriers to people's stories, like the things that are getting in the way. And it's like, no, we can fix this. And once I realized that all of these things that people are experiencing, both the neurobiology and then their perception of the neurobiology, it's like I think one of the things that people feel, I know one of the things that people feel when they come in to finally address some of the trauma issues is like, I don't think that this can get better. I think this is just who I am as a person. And to be able to, put the car salesman hat on and be like, no, I got a deal for you. Like, we can fix this. This
Right.
is a solvable problem. And there is no greater sense of accomplishment than being able to take a solvable problem and help people solve it in a way where they're turning the tide on their story. I don't know of a better high as a therapist than watching a PCL5 score drop down to subthreshold for PTSD. So yeah, I mean, I think that was the hook. I think that's what got me.
So you went through graduate school. What position did you take right after studying?
Community mental health. So in Oklahoma, we have a 2-year candidacy. I know it's probably the same, probably across the nation. You just have a period of time where you are under a supervisor and trying to get as much experience under that supervisor as you can. And since I knew that was the direction that I probably wanted to go, I went into community mental health just to get as much exposure to different populations as possible. And there is no lacking for trauma experiences in community mental health. And so that's where I started. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the meme of the guy with like the strings behind him, where it's like he's got all the papers and the strings are everywhere. I felt like that person because I was like, oh, man, like trauma seems to be the string that is presenting all these issues with homelessness, chronically mentally ill, all the problems that people are having trying to find the right medications, and, helping all these people try to navigate in the systems, how they were having all these trouble with the systems. And I was like, this is fight or flight, almost all of these issues that we're running into. I just felt like I would say probably 80 to 90% of all of the clients that I encountered in community mental health, the common thread was just their shared trauma history. And so that even drove me further. Like, I just need to know everything I can know.
Right. So, I mean, obviously you have a passion for this, and it seems like it started quite early for you, but having that passion, right, and even having an inkling of knowledge in the beginning is one thing, and then working with clients is another thing. I'm wondering if you can talk about kind of an early challenge for you, early clinical error for you.
Oh man, that's a phenomenal question. Because I just think that's the best way to learn is trying as best as you can to glean from other people's stories. If you can relate to them and go, I would fall in that hole too. I think as an 8, which I know I'm kind of a rare breed in this work, but I think as an 8, I always struggle with moving too fast. I'm so eager for the solution for people. I really am, where I'm like, we can get there fast. And you want that for people so badly that I think there were a lot of times where I'm like, yeah, let's start doing what we need to do.
Right.
And especially with trauma, I feel like that safety net, you need those deposits in the account. You need a lot of deposits in the account to do that work. And I had to learn to be patient and build that account up and time it. Like, this is the time where you can really push for, we need to confront that belief system, or we need to unpack that. This is the time we need to do that. And you can't do that without money in the bank. So I would say at the beginning, it was the eagerness outweighed the nuance of people. So if I'm talking to any fellow 8s, I would say, slow things down. You're procrastinating on purpose.
Now, I think I know what you mean by when you say money in the bank, but for our listeners, be more specific about what you mean with that.
Yeah, that's fair. So in your methods and techniques class, they always tell you, like, you're going to spend some time building rapport. Like, that's our phrase, right? We're going to build rapport. And I don't think that lands really until you're working with a lot of clients, but essentially what you're doing is establishing safety via small, what I would call deposits, just to use the metaphor, over time, becoming a more and more safe place to pick apart experiences, especially for somebody who's been through trauma, because a lot of times they are sizing you up every bit as much as you are trying to understand them. They're keeping a really close tab on you too. So just proving over time with small deposits that you have safety, you have margin, you have a deep well of safety here, so that at a certain point, when it's time to take a withdrawal, when it's time for me to kind of test the limits of that relationship, I've got margin. I've got room to work with here, that I have enough evidence for my safety to discount the belief system that it's not safe to talk about these things, or it's not safe to go to this place. And you just can't do that without time. You know, there's not a replacement for putting in the relational account balance. Like you kind of have to have it there. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. No, I appreciate that. But what do you think within you allows you to do this work? Because it's again, it sounds like you were kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of hooked right away. There was something that really intrigued you about this work. But what do you think it is about you and yourself, aside from being was it a 2 on the Enneagram, that allows you to do this?
So I feel like and I work with such amazing people, so I kind of get to watch. In my practice, all we do is trauma work. That's what we do. So everybody that I work with, I think everybody that I work with is a 2. So they're the naturally warm, fuzzy people, and they would tell you that they had to learn kind of sturdiness, like some rhythms that kind of help them establish like the boundaries that they need to have. I would say that I kind of had to work in reverse. I really had to learn the pacing, you know, the ability to be more present and not be 2 steps ahead, to be in the moment. But I really do think the thing that geared me towards it the most was just natural curiosity, really wanting to understand people. And then I think the thing that couples up with is the problem solving piece. And when you start to realize how much trauma really is sort of an underlying element to just about everything that you're going to be treating, I think at that point you realize, if I'm going to solve a lot of these problems, I really need to understand how these early life experiences, these stories that people have been through, are shaping the way they do life from this point forward. So I don't know of an area that's more foundational for good mental health practice than really knowing your stuff when it comes to trauma.
You know, having spent this little time talking to you, I'm thinking back to your bio, and in the bio it said that you focus on treating first responders, and it feels like that population will be a good fit for you. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. I think it is a really tricky population to work with for a lot of counselors, because I think they can be really overwhelming. They are so solution focused that a lot of times they can be very disarming to therapists. And I think a lot of times they feel like almost like there's this aggression that's coming into this room. But I think it's almost like I know a fellow zebra, like I recognize my herd a little bit.
Right.
So yes, I mean, it definitely plays in that, you know, it doesn't tend to intimidate a lot, and watching people be very desperate for solutions, I'm like, oh, we're gonna move fast. And that's the beautiful thing, is when you work with first responders, you usually do. You move really quickly. So they're paced a little at my pace.
I wonder if we can kind of dial in and get more specific. Can you talk about a particular case, obviously without, names or anything, but give us more specificity about what it's like, what your experience is like?
So I would say the difference between, the general population and working with first responders is a couple of things. One in particular, first responders usually don't come in until they are absolutely certain that they can't handle it on their own. Whereas you might start with what they would call like the civilian population. If you're working with civilian population, it may be 4 or 5 weeks before we even address what you've been through. They, most people in those situations really do need those deposits. First responders are, I don't need a ton of deposits. I need a ton of solutions and I need them quickly. I've spent however many years trying to do this on my own, and I've kind of come to the end of me. So as soon as a first responder comes to your office, a lot of times they are very solution focused, almost to the point where you kind of have to go backwards. We're like, we actually do have to feel some things, like we're gonna, as much as I just want to say, here's the ABCs of how to do this, we are actually going to have to feel some stuff. And so I find myself having to pump the brakes with them a little bit. I've had a lot of officers who jump to solutions faster than they can emotionally sort of appreciate how they got. So I had an officer one time that worked a SIDS case, a sudden infant death. And when they came in, they were like, okay, we'll just, I know that you talked to so-and-so who was a friend of theirs, and he got to the point where he wasn't having nightmares anymore. So if you could just give me whatever the magic, the fairy dust is for not having nightmares anymore, I would really appreciate that. And I was like, man, I would really appreciate that too. If I could do that for you, that would be amazing. But we had to slow down and actually feel grief for that family. We had to slow down.
And how obviously every case is different, but how did you do that with this particular case?
So I came at it, so I practice cognitive processing therapy. And for anybody that's not familiar with that, it takes a lot of its leanings from CBT, which is, the foundations most of us are trained in. So it was a comfortable slide over. I'm also certified in EMDR, and I like that. It's a little bit more artsy, a little less heady. But with cognitive processing therapy, we're really looking at belief systems and trying to shift what we call stuck points to more healthy and adaptive stuck points. And one of his belief systems is if you feel it, then that makes you weak. And so we really had to do battle with that one a little bit. And we found out that most of the people that he respects and loves are people who feel really deeply. And most of the things that made him a good parent to his children are when he feels very deeply. And so, that's just a hop and a skip jump over to, well, then grief is a healthy way that we attach to our community and to the people in our community, especially very small children. And so then that's when the light bulb comes on, like, oh, I have to feel this. And you're like, yeah, you do have to feel this in the safety of an environment that appreciates how healthy and adaptive that is. And so then watching, the 6'3", 200-pound guy go, I really wanted that kid to live. And it's like, yeah, of course you did, because you're a good person. You're a good dad. You care deeply about your community. And then he gets to walk away from meaning instead of confusion. I mean, can you beat that? Like, I don't know.
There's something so tragic about, that population obviously isn't unlike the military population, right? Where in order to do their job, they need a certain emotional armor. And yet oftentimes they pay a deep price. And then in order to heal, it's almost they need the antithesis of what their job takes to do. It's yeah.
I actually really relate to them in that capacity, because I think trauma therapists are kind of the same way. It's like you need to be sturdy, because to take care of these people, you need to be present and have your own stuff kind of appropriately, at least out of the way, so that you can attend to these people. But at the same time, I have the privilege of having so many people in my community that teach me healthy practices on how to do that, how to prevent burnout, how to prevent vicarious trauma. We have whole methodologies for that in our field, how to help us with that. Somebody gives me trauma stewardship and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Thank you. They don't have that. And I think that's the piece that I really kind of empathize with. It's like, I'm so eager, once we've dealt with the trauma that you've been exposed to, I am so eager to put tools on your tool belt that will make you resilient in helping other people who have been through trauma. Because most law enforcement officers, that is what they're doing. They don't know they're doing that, but they're attending to the worst day in people's lives.
Right.
So they are also having a front row seat to kind of broken and traumatized people, just with none of the tools.
So, you kind of made reference to taking care of our stuff or your stuff, but what is your stuff? How do you take care of that? How have you taken care of that?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'll try my best to do it short. Lots of things. Anybody who hasn't read it, Trauma Stewardship is an excellent book to help you look at both the pitfalls and things that are helpful. Another book that I would really recommend is a book called Emotionally Healthy Leadership, which is not a trauma. It's not a therapist book at all. It's actually for pastors.
Huh.
But it talks about establishing internal rhythms. And I really do think that you need those to do. I really think you need them to do therapy well, but especially if you're gonna to do trauma work. So
what are internal rhythms?
It's a really good question. First of all, I take Sabbath, which is a religious concept, but I don't think it has to be a religious concept. I think you can apply it any way you want, but I pick a day out of my week that I do nothing but play and rest, because what we know about windows of tolerance is that whenever you do hefty lifting, if you will take time to play and rest, that is how you kind of let those muscles grow, and then you can lift more on the back end. So I take a day to play and rest every single week. I sun up to sundown. I don't do laundry. I don't do notes. I don't do any documentation. I don't do obligations. I don't do meetings. Those are days that myself and my family, my husband, our 4 kids, we play and we rest. And that is probably the biggest thing that I do. The other thing that I do internally in session is I do a lot of self-mantra for the moment. So the feelings still happen, even as an 8. I'm not a robot. I have feelings. And when I hear those stories and I experience them, I acknowledge them. And I practice that mindfulness right in the middle of the session, where I go, you are feeling what you're feeling because you are a competent therapist who cares deeply about your clients, and you have the competency to do the things that you need to do next. And so that sort of narrative and that dialogue pulls me through that session really well. There's not another person who's more equipped for this moment at this time than you, so lean in. And I physically will lean in. And then at the end of that, I have a sense of accomplishment, of mastery, more than like, oh gosh, that happened to me. And that's something that I think that a lot of new therapists can probably relate to, is like, that session just happened to me. Like I've been hit by an emotional bus. And so I feel like sort of really fine tuning that dialogue in a way that in that moment you can be present enough to go, oh, there that is. I recognize that empathy. I recognize that feeling. That's a strength, not a liability. Lean in, do competent work, and physically push your body into the session in that moment. Move yourself towards that other individual, view that as a strength, and then on the back end, congratulate yourself for being present. It's the same thing we teach our first responders to do after they've kind of had that gut hit. Lean in and then congratulate yourselves and each other on the back end that you were so present for somebody during such a difficult moment. So those are kind of one is an external thing. The Sabbath is an external thing. And then just having that kind of working concurrent narrative in therapy that helps you lean in.
I love that. I mean, that seems like you developed that from hard-won experience. I mean, it's such I think a beautiful articulation of mindfulness and being in the moment, being able to do that in the moment. It's not easy. Having the wherewithal and the self-awareness and the strength to say, right, yeah,
for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, Chelsea. Awesome. Love the work you're doing. Super inspiring. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Oh man. Probably email. I'm old school. As much as I would like to give people like all these different immaculate ways, I'm pretty tied to my email. So it is chelsea.brown@restoration, RESTORATION, BH, B as in boy, H as in Henry.com.
Okay. And I'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com.
Awesome.
And your website is restorationbh.com.
Yep,
restorationbehavioralhealth.com. Awesome. We'll have that linked up as well. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care.